Martin started by saying he had the hardest job because he was dressing you after lunch. I think I've got the hardest job as I'm coming after those two.
Let me introduce you, Richard.
Yes.
So we know, and Richard will have more to say about this, that there is only one funder dedicated to community radio in the UK. There's some other sort of friendly ones. There's only one dedicated to it, and it was set up under the legislation that created the community radio licence. And Richard Hilton here has served on the panel for the Community Radio Fund for pretty well as long as anyone can remember. One of my pleasures, and the word pleasure and chairing the CMA is not often accompanied in the same sentence, but one of my pleasures as the chair of the CMA was to sort of re-sign you to that role. Yeah, he's thanked me ever since. But a huge amount of work goes into this. So today is our opportunity as the practitioners of community radio to find out a little bit more about the fund, and I believe there's an opportunity open at the moment. But let's welcome Richard to our conference today.
Thank you.
Can I start by asking you what the background to the fund is?
Well, yeah, I was doing some background, digging out some statistics on this. It started back in 2005-06, so it's been, I think we're now in our 14th year. It came about at the start of the community radio licences, when the government, under a lot of pressure, said, well, we have got to fund this fledgling industry, and we'll put some money into it on an annual basis. And this money was sort of, at the start, was about £500,000, and it was just for community radio stations, licensed community radio stations, ones that were licensed by Ofcom. They were the only people allowed to apply, so it is unique to licensed community radio stations. If you're running an RSL, you can't apply. If you're online, sorry Jason, you can't apply, etc., etc. It is just for licensed community radio stations. So it is just for basically people in this room, or lots of people in this room. It was set up by Ofcom, Ofcom are managing it on behalf of DCMS. DCMS give Ofcom the money. They set up a panel to start with, and they decided on 3 people, and they wanted one of the people to be a representative from the Community Media Association. So the Community Media Association was asked to nominate somebody. I was serving on the council, I was the treasurer at the time. They thought this would be a good post for somebody with a financial background to sit on it, so I was nominated. Ofcom accepted the nomination, and I've been there ever since. I don't seem to be able to get out of it. So that's about 14 years. There's 3 members of the panel. They have changed over the years, apart from me. At the moment, the panel is chaired by a woman called Wendy Pilmer, who is an incredibly powerful woman. She's a consultant in radio. If you contact her, half the time she's in somewhere like the Tangiers or some Eastern European country doing training for these regimes, and the other time she's up to her ankles in mud because she's also a landscape gardener. So she has a really varied background. Fiona Lennox is the other member of the panel. She's an executive director of the Communications Consumer Panel. She's also another very powerful female member of the panel, and then there's me. So they're the 3 members of the panel, and we are responsible for handing out this money that is given to Ofcom by DCMS. We meet twice a year. We met back in June for what is round 1 of the financial year. So we meet in June, and then we're meeting again in January. And it was between these 4 walls, which doesn't really mean very much, but between these 4 walls, we only had 23 applications, which was way down on what we normally get. And having read all of them, having gone through all of them, and gone through them again at the meeting, at least twice, we could only give money out to 6 of those applicants, and we gave only £85,000. And that was the lowest we've ever given. It was the first time we've given under £100,000 at a round, a funding run. So it's really low, and we were really quite worried about the number of applications and also the quality of them. There was a reason. Ofcom felt that they hadn't actually advertised the fact that the applications had opened, so people might have missed it. But we felt that people were missing, the applications have fallen down in quality. So one of the things was agreed is that Ofcom have issued a little paper, a 4-page, I think it's 4 pages, guidance to applicants, which is on the website. And I sort of said, I'll put my head above the parapet and I'll come and talk to people. So I did a couple of sessions at the Community Radio Association conference a few months ago, and I'm here today to talk about the Ofcom Community Radio Fund panel.
Can we perhaps drill down a little bit further into what those pitfalls are? I don't think Ofcom's under-advertising it is probably a full reason why there was so few successful applications out here, because anybody who's in licensed community radio is aware of the fund, and I haven't met a station yet who hasn't either wanted to or had a good crack at it at some point. But on the panel, what are the, you're getting these applications through, what are the ones you're just striking the biro through saying, no way on this occasion? Where are the errors?
Well, a classic way that you can just have yours crossed right through is if you apply for the wrong thing. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, a really good station, a station I really like, applied for capital cost of a motor vehicle. And they made a really good case that they would use this vehicle to go out and do outside broadcasts. They would undercut the local commercial radio station. It would generate income. That's good. We like people who generate income. But they applied for the wrong thing. You can't apply for capital expenditure or motor vehicle costs. So we just have to reject it. And I was really disappointed because I personally wanted to give them money. And I think the others probably did. But they were applying for the wrong thing. So you've got to read the guidance notes and apply for the right thing. So that's a classic way of just getting rejected straight out of hand. And we have to do that. I think an overriding thing to remember about this is that it is taxpayers' money. It is not coming from a nice benefactor or anything. It is taxpayers' money. So I have to always think I'm giving out taxpayers' money, and what I don't want is I don't want the National Audit Office interviewing me. I don't want a Daily Mail reporter phoning me up. I don't want the Taxpayer Alliance phoning me up or anything like that. So we have to be absolutely, we have to follow the rules. And so if you apply for the wrong thing, that's going to get you thrown out. So that's a classic example of why you might fail. The other thing that we found with the stations is there's this famous question 2, which is a very simple question, and it just basically says, tell us about your station. And so many stations don't realise that we don't know you all. We haven't visited you. We may not have listened to a lot of your station. And people fill out this very simple question really badly, and they don't make the station come to life. They don't enthuse us about your station. And it is very difficult, if we read that and we're not enthused about the station, to then go on to the rest of it and be enthusiastic about the rest of it. So one of my really strong pleas to you is to look at question 2 and think about how you describe your station to us. You have got to bring it to life. It is not a question to be answered dryly. It is a question where you have got to make that station come to life and make us feel really enthusiastic about it. Quick example, there was a station that was doing really well. It was describing itself, and I was already won over by it. And then they had this one little sentence which said, "We are crazy busy!" exclamation mark. And I thought, I get it. You're crazy busy. That is what a community radio station should be like. And all of us spotted that. It's one little sentence, and we're enthused by that. And that's the kind of thing you need to do with us. You need to make us realise that we haven't visited you, we don't know you, or chances are we don't know you. Bring your station to life on paper.
You do realise, Richard, that after the ones we did in Sheffield, as soon as you say crazy busy, we can imagine the exclamation mark going in. All the pens went crazy busy, saying you're now going to get 20, 30 applications called crazy busy.
But it was a bit, it was the right place in the form. It basically summed up everything they'd put in before. It was just a really nice little statement. There are little buzzwords that some people use. Eclectic is another word that people use. Just be really careful about the word eclectic, because you're probably not eclectic if you think about it, but that's just an aside. So question 2 is really important to get right, and that's one thing.
Well, just thinking about some of those things that the panel do like, and I'm just going to use an example which you were good enough to feedback to me on the Summer Valley application, is one of our volunteers had come up with a graphic that demonstrated income and expenditure. You could kind of get where Summer Valley's revenue and revenue streams and its expenditure and the areas of expenditure in 10 seconds because of this particular graphic. And what I didn't realise when this guy put this graphic together is, and I don't think he knew it, is that it was also a very similar graphic to that Florence Nightingale put together, which won the extraordinary inept government of the day over to the sort of a vaguely good plan of what she was planning to do in nursing. But so the point is that there was a visually stimulating thing that gave maximum information without having to read yards of copy, and I think you liked that.
Well, yeah, it was a vague. I mean, I wanted to copy it for the Community Media Association accounts and use it there. It was just a very nice little visual, and it explained the figures very clearly. And clarity is always good in an application form.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's. There's going to be room for questions on this in a moment. But how is it advisable? I mean, in terms of we've got the award, we've got the money, we're going to start our project. What is your advice then to how you manage the impact of that project, and what are the obligations of the fund at the end of it?
I've got to be honest, I don't deal with the paperwork, I don't deal with after the application's gone out. I am there to give out the money. Ofcom will manage that side of it, I'm afraid. I don't get involved with that. I know we have had cases where Ofcom have come back to people and said, we need more information. There is an annual report where where Ofcom pick out quotes from people that say how well they've done or whether it's not worked. But Dom, I don't really...
Well, I'll pick up then, because I do know that Ofcom have really tightened up on it. In fact,
yes.
Funders have in general less money around, inevitable really. So where one might not have expected to have had heavy scrutiny, Ofcom are particularly sharp on this. In fact, I had a perfectly legitimate question on an award that we got, and they asked for clarification on it. So do expect to have to monitor the progress of your report. My advice anyway, I'm sure this will be echoed around the room here, is that any grant project that you're doing, grant funded project, just manage the impact of it, take the photographs, get the audio, and get the social media stuff, where appropriate of course, so that you can return that to the funders. And I think in the case of the Community Radio Fund, you should be in a position to file a report as the project closes.
I mean, I would agree. I mean, I work for a charity. We get lots of grants, and we have to report on those. And it gets more and more onerous, the reporting requirements. I mean, sometimes it's just ridiculously over the top.
Yeah.
Anything to do with European funding is ridiculously over the top. It's
Okay.
not a political statement, by the way. It's just a fact.
There is one more thing I want to kind of touch on before the session ends, but very much open to questions. Who would like to ask a question? Martin, I believe you'd like to.
Oh, as if by magic I nearly ended up with two. I know you can't answer this, but I think it is worth saying and feeding back, is you read the grants that have been given out, and it's for start a new position, a new development, or it's for a new development project, or it's for a project to look at this and feedback and all this sort of stuff. We never seem, as practitioners in the field, we never seem to get the output of that. And I think we need to implore Ofcom to actually release these feedback reports. Because if a station has got a grant to employ someone, and after 12 months they didn't re-employ them because of whatever issues, the whole sector should really be learning from those mistakes. So we don't all... How many grants do you see that are for a development member of staff? They're not there in 18 months' time, and no one's learning from those mistakes. And that money's just being given out again and again and again, and we're not getting better at it. We need that learning from the reports.
Absolutely agree with you. Push on Ofcom to get them to give out that background. I mean, it may be confidential, I'm not sure. I only actually see extracts that Ofcom have taken out of it. And if you read the annual report that they do publish, some of them are very positive, and they do also publish the ones where, well, we got to the end of it and it didn't work. So they don't just, they aren't just putting the best stories out there. But I don't have a problem with you trying to push for that at all.
And in the middle here.
Hello, I'm Pat from Wolverhampton.
Hello.
I think this is a contribution, not a question. We applied for the last round.
Yeah.
We failed.
Yes. Trying to remember your application, but I can't.
But I had very good feedback.
Yes. Oh, good.
A person phoned me and gave me very positive feedback.
Was that Elaine?
Yeah. And it's on that topic of sustainability. Where I could improve, when I'm urged to resubmit with an improved job description and Gantt chart showing exactly what the position will be after 12 months so that the role is sustainable. So rather than it being addressed at the end of 12-month funding, how is this post going to be sustained. It's now been addressed at the front of that 12-month funding.
Good. I mean, the fund is there to try and get financial stability into the sector. So we do, if you're applying for a fundraiser or whatever it is, we want them ideally to raise their own salary, the station manager's salary, and be able to go on to the second year. We would like to see that. And if you don't address that, then we're kind of thinking, okay, so what happens in year 2? Do you just come back to us the second time? So first of all, I'm really pleased that you got good feedback from Elaine, because sometimes what I hear is that, well, we phoned up Ofcom and they really didn't say very much apart from, well, there's just not enough money. So I'm really pleased that you got detailed feedback like that. And I think, Gantt chart, the job description is really important for a number of reasons. One, I mean, we sometimes get job descriptions that are about a third of a page long, and we're going, that's not detailed enough. And then we get them that are 3 pages long, and we're going, you're applying for a half-time post, and there's a job description that runs to 3 pages. They can't do this. It's unrealistic. So a realistic job description is also very important. The Gantt chart is a really good idea, if you can put one in. So I would emphasise the importance of a job description that is realistic to what you're applying for. So it sounds as though you're on the right track.
Yeah, I wanted to show that there's actually positivity.
That's
Great, thank you. Thank you for that contribution. Has anyone else got a question? Can I just ask, obviously this is open to licensed community radio that is up and running. This is not about start-up. How many community stations in the room have ever applied for the fund? So that's 1, 2, 3.
Well, there's 1,219 applications that we've dealt with over the years. So.
And so there's about 12 hands went up then. How many have received from the fund? Okay, that is the majority of those.
Well, that's interesting because the success rate is about 32%. So it is quite it is a very competitive process, and we don't have enough money. Over the years, we've had applications for £26 million, and we've only had £6 million to give out.
How do you know if you've had one knocked back and you haven't had the benefit of that kind of really good personalised feedback? How do you know if your rejection is down to sheer weight of numbers that year, or that you kind of messed up on the criteria?
Well, I think you need to get feedback from Ofcom, and clearly last time they obviously decided to give a lot of feedback by the sounds of it, well, especially to Wolverhampton. And sometimes they will just give feedback which is, it was a very competitive process, there was not enough money. And that probably means that we had too many good applications. But the point I'm making is that the next round, which closes in early November, we have got something like £300,000, probably, that we've got to give out. And we really want to give it out, because if we don't give it out, we've got to give it back to the government, to DCMS. And nobody wants to give money to the government, back to the government, and it sends the wrong picture to the government that we can't give it out. So we really do need good quality applications this round. And there probably isn't a better round to apply for. We've never had this much money to give away.
One of the extraordinary things about that, and the reflection of the last 2 rounds, is that there's a lot of ongoing complaints, if you like, that there isn't enough funding in our sector, and yet the one dedicated fund that isn't giving the money away. There's a massive sort of mismatch there, and I think particularly your efforts to go out and talk to practitioners means, unfortunately, you're going to have a busy Christmas, I suspect.
Christmas is cancelled.
When the round that comes in. We cannot give money back to the government because, as you say, this will set a very dangerous precedent. Which leads me on nicely to the Community Radio Fund had a certain lifespan with the legislation that created community radio. I think it's been extended on at least one occasion. Then, after the 2015 election, the government that merged out of that election put it in for 5 years, which was the expected term of that parliament, which takes us up to the 2020, doesn't it? So year after next. Do we know what the kind of likely prospects are after? Is this really because we're in odd times, we don't know what kind of government we're going to have by then?
I have not heard anything about it. I just know that they can't allow the Community Radio Fund panel to go beyond the next general election, because that then ties the hands of a potential new administration. So that's why it's limited there. I do hear reports that they're going to increase the fund because we're going to get SSDAB. But I then went through the consultation document that came out this week, and they talk about the Community Radio Fund, but they don't actually give any answers about whether they're going to increase it, or I didn't see any answers in there.
In your view then, and you and I are both directors of the CMA, I mean, should the CMA be lobbying for how that fund might look? If it's going to increase because the landscape is changing, as you say, with SSDAB, I mean, is this time to consider a 3-year funding package to apply for, or a 2-year funding package rather than just the first year? And also, is it time to consider those who've got their licence but haven't got themselves to air yet? We've got Keynsham over there who are in that exact position now. Wouldn't it be wonderful if they could apply to the fund at this moment of time if they come on air in 2019? Do you think the CMA, or indeed any other organisation, could be lobbying for any of this?
I think there may be a problem with legislation, that I think the legislation says it's licensed community radio stations, and you are only a licensed community radio station when you go on, effectively when you go on air. And I think that's a problem. It'd be very, the number of things I'd love to do. One, I'd love to give money to stations that are coming up to going on air so that they go on air properly. I would love to be able to give grants that lasted more than 1 year, because realistically it would be nice to do 2 years or 3-year grants, but we can't do that. I just hope that, I think we should keep lobbying. Everybody in the community radio sector should keep pushing DCMS to put more money into this sector, and probably the Community Radio Fund is the way to do it. And if we are going to have SSDAB and loads of community radio stations on there, I think we really have got to seriously increase the fund.
Well, my sort of parting thought on this then is this whole fund is out of the DCMS budget. DCMS does not enjoy a great budget, or in fact perhaps no government department does at this moment in time, but it is one of the junior ministries, if I can put it that way. Do you think we, as a sector, CMA as a representative organisation, might be able to go to DCMS and say, could we get a match funding situation here? So then we could go to the philanthropic side of things, or other funders, the lottery, and say, listen, if the government commit to £500,000, we can commit to 500,000, or $1 million, match it with $1 million, and start to grow the fund that way. And there's two thoughts there. Would the legislation allow for that? You may not be in a position to answer this, Richard, but would the legislation allow for that? And in the same breath, if we did that, would DCMS say, well done, chaps, and on your own now, we're withdrawing our support?
Well, I cannot believe that DCMS would say you can't get match funding, and I think DCMS would love match funding because it makes them look good. It means that every pound of theirs they put into the sector effectively raises another pound. So I think they would like it. I think there's an interesting issue that we as a fund are trying to do financial stability within the sector. I think there is a real case for trying to raise a fund that does the really exciting things in the sector, and funds people who are making innovative programming, etc., etc. But I think that's a real wish list. I think we just have to go with what we've got at the moment. But I think, yes, if we can get match funding, I don't think DCMS would object. I think Ofcom would be quite happy to manage the fund, an increased fund, so I don't think that's a problem.
I think what's needed here is leadership of some description.
Well, it's somebody to do some really serious lobbying of it.
Anyone fancy doing that? Or was that just a question? Glenn is volunteering now to lead us.
I think Glenn wants to ask a question.
I asked slightly tongue-in-cheek. So we do have time for questions. Glenn?
Yeah.
Oh, microphone.
Where is it?
Glenn Rollins, Gloss FM in South Gloucestershire. Yeah, how would you view an application then that actually said, well, if you give us a grant, there's a local business or something that's going to match what you give us?
Well, I think
would that help the application?
Yes, because one of the questions we do ask, I think, is I haven't got it in front of me, but I think one of the questions we do ask is about match funding, because it's just really good if you can get match funding. And there have been applications over the years where they said, well, if you give us a small amount of money, we can get match funding from a couple of charities. It then builds it up. So yes, it's a really good thing to try and do. And if you can get match funding, put it in, make the point.
Thanks. And Pippa, I think, had a question down here. Sue? Sue? Thanks.
Thank you. It's a very sad state of affairs that if you can't give away all the money, then you have to give it back to the government. So that's one thing. So perhaps we could have, not for myself, because we have been awarded some money quite recently, but workshops and more guidance so that you can get more applications that you can fund, so that all of that money is spent. But coming back to the lobbying, I may be wrong on this, but I'm sure I've read that the commercial sector have just been given, is it £1 million from government to create community content?
Yeah.
Has anybody else read that?
Yeah.
300,000.
Yeah.
3 million.
Yeah, 3 million. 3 million over 3 years for the commercial sector to create community content. There is something wrong there, and that is a failure of the leadership of our sector in talking to government. I spent some time on the CMA Council. We were having this conversation then, and I'm sure it's a conversation that's been going since the beginnings of community radio. And you know, we need to have that conversation with government and not keep going around in circles.
Well, I think this is a really good point. At the moment, let me just explain, the Community Media Association is recognised in the legislation that created community radio in 2003 as the representative body. So therefore, our sector has an organisation that the government or DCMS will talk to. I have concerns, which I don't mind sharing with you, that this is not as high up the CMA agenda as it should be. And I do urge everybody, can I ask how many of our stations here are CMA members? Okay, that's about 10. Max, you noting this? Where's Max gone? Is she here somewhere? Anyway. And how many are licensed community radio stations? No, actually, forget that. How many are radio stations who are not members of the CMA? Okay. Well, the CMA have not announced this yet, but will be shortly. Their AGM will be on the 8th of December. There will be remote contributions to that as well. I do urge you, they are representing us. You know, we are members, they are representing us. They are also representing the sector. I do urge us all to write in, and I will be a conduit if necessary. I'm sure Richard would as well, I don't want to speak for you, but I will happily be a conduit for any communications with this kind of agenda, because we do need to have clear representation with the decision makers. It's fine to want to become a charity and improve our contributions to the sector that way, but it's proving a very disruptive element, as we need to be sitting down and talking to government and getting this agenda on track. So can I urge everybody to write to the CMA with these points? And this has stimulated a little reaction, I feel. Pete, at the back of the room.
Very much so. I've been waiting for this one.
Right, okay. Before you say...
ready for both barrels here? Are you ready for both barrels?
No, hang on. But before you go for it, we are about to have a break.
Yeah.
And when we come back, we're going to have next developments for the sector.
Do you want me to save it up for them?
Yes, I'd love you to. Has
Okay.
anyone got their final question on a community radio fund?
On the fund.
Hang on one
On
second.
the fund.
Can I just, that lady there was waiting.
Yes,
Yeah.
Joanne.
Excuse me.
Hi Richard, it's
Hello.
Joanne from Glastonbury FM.
Yes.
I just wanted some clarity on the fact that you don't fund for 2 years, and the reason I ask is because I've got funding for Station Development Manager, and part of the job that I've got to do is fundraise to make it sustainable, and the fundings that as well as the commercial side of the fundraising, grant funding that I'm getting takes months to do, to research and do, and then the results takes months to come back. So 12 months in a period of a funding application for a station manager or development manager is not very long. And what I'm wondering now is that, well, do I have to now apply for funding again but change the name and change it slightly, rather than say, you know, I'm looking for the second year funding because I'm halfway there but I'm not quite. And it was what somebody else was saying is, will that appear a failure? Because it's not a failure, So the first 12 months that I've used, there's lots of results, but I need to carry that on, and the bigger funding bid that I'm getting won't have come in yet. So why can they not, or have I misunderstood something?
It's interesting because we have never given funding that lasts more than a year, as far as I'm aware, that I can remember. And I was trying to find it in the rules and regulations, and I did try and contact Sue, and I didn't get an answer. Well, I was thinking about contacting Sue to say it is right that we don't give funding for more than a year. But we've never given money for more than a year, because we expect within a year for things to have started happening, enough to have started happening that the role will be sustainable. I absolutely agree, because I work for a charity and I know that it's really difficult to get things off the ground in a year. But I'm afraid that I think that is what we're stuck with at the moment. And I agree, it is quite difficult, because some of these grants do take a long time to come to fruition. I can only agree with you that it's very difficult. But I think that's what we're stuck with.
Yeah, but it could be defined as that, okay, you're giving this grant for a 12-month period, but then you can apply again for another 12-month period, as opposed to asking for, say, for argument's sake, and rounding figures up. You know, if you ask for £50,000 over a 2-year period, that's a bit too much to control.
Yeah.
But if you ask for £25,000 for a 12-month period, then Ofcom can check on that and say, okay, this is worth. You know, this is working well. We'll give this one for another year. So there's a real, you know, I'm in that quandary at the moment. Do I take a risk and say, look, this is going great, I'm risking applying again, or just kind of changing the job role and reapplying for a different job role but doing the same thing? So it's a difficult question.
I think you've got to be realistic that if you apply again for the sort of second-year funding, saying we haven't quite got there, there is a question mark. There has to be a question mark, because, you know, giving somebody funding twice in 2 years when everybody else is also applying for funding, it's quite difficult to justify that, because we would, and in a way we would. No, sorry, okay. It's very difficult to give you money a second year when which probably means turning down other people, because. I'm trying to think how to word this.
Well, I suppose my argument is that when you're saying that there's not enough applications and we need to give this money out rather than give it back, then right. I'm saying then maybe. Well,
if you're talking about a specific this round, then I would encourage people to apply. And if you apply saying, I haven't quite got there yet, I need some more funding, because we have got a lot more money, there is more chance that you would succeed. In a normal year, with a lot of applications, we'd probably have to be quite tough and say, this hasn't worked and you're coming back for more money, why would we give you more money? We don't necessarily believe you'll do it.
I think I'm going to suggest that possibly this conversation continues over the break, because I do want us to have a break, during which I fully intend to cut the Summer Valley FM cake. So if anyone would like to join me in a slice, then we will celebrate our birthday with our friends and colleagues who have gathered here today. We're going to come back for one more session in which we're going to discuss the next steps of the sector. Richard?
Can I just do five quick, I think it's only 5 quick points about applying for the fund, and they are just basic ones. First of all, there is guidance notes and there is advice for grant applicants. Actually, you ought to read these for whatever grants you're applying, because they're really basic common sense. But the points I'd make about this grant, this fund, applying to this fund, is, first of all, get this question 2 right, make your station shine. Secondly, get it in on time. As they point out, they turned out, if you don't send your application in on time, they will reject it. So get it in on time. It's come up a couple of other times, people talking about sense check and proofreading. What they talk about, and what I said to them, and it's my quote, is get a critical friend to review your application. It's really important. Get somebody else to read it. That's the same for any grant application you do. Usual things, answer the question. Sometimes people don't answer the question we ask. I mean, this is just a basic exam technique. And job descriptions, make them consistent with job titles, make them realistic, make the targets appropriate. And the other one that is mentioned in here, I would absolutely emphasise, is check your sums.
Richard Hilton, many thanks.
Right.